Yo, what's happening, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Free to Grow CFO podcast, where we dive deep into conversations about scaling a D2C brand with a profit focused mindset. I'm your host, Jon Blair, founder of Free to Grow CFO. We're the go to outsourced finance and accounting firm for 8 and 9 figure D2C brands. And today I'm here with my pal, Melissa Cafagna, like lasagna. She runs capital partnerships at Settle and also calls herself the financing fairy godmother, depending on what social media channels you find her on. Melissa, you have been a fan of my content for quite some time,
A
and
long
I
time.
appreciate that. And it was great to finally meet not too long ago, and now to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I am doing well, kind of just coming off the high of a wonderful break for Thanksgiving. So good to be around loved ones. And I feel well rested, so I'm so excited that we planned this like on this day. I feel like so much gratitude. So thank you for asking. And I definitely don't run capital partnerships, but I I like to think I sometimes run the show. No, but I totally don't. And yeah, is it okay if I introduce myself right now?
100%.
Awesome. So, I get asked this question a lot, like, how did I end up at Settle? I actually went to school for accounting and, did the whole public accounting thing, pivoted to working at a modeling agency in LA and was there for quite some time doing accounting. And kind of just had this quarter life crisis where I'm like, what am I doing with my life? And decided to pivot into sales after doing this like amazing sabbatical in Europe, which that's like a whole can of worms that can be talked about another time. But I sometimes feel like I've lived like four different lives, just with like the craziness that I've been through when it comes to like my career and like my personal life. But then I finally decided like I'm gonna go all in on sales, but I also wanted to stay close to fintech, just because it just felt like because I still definitely had like this I would say like joy around like accounting and finance and helping businesses, specifically small businesses. But it definitely made sense with my background to pivot to fintech and worked at a couple tech companies related to like e-com businesses, Amazon businesses, and then ended up at Settle, which love the team there. We're an awesome bunch, and we have the best manager. Shout out to Chris. So yeah, that's basically how I ended up there, and now basically helping founders with capital and inventory software, which has been a delight. We're solving some real problems, like who doesn't need money, right? Who doesn't need like to try to optimize their inventory, right? It's such a nightmare for so many brands. So yeah.
I love it. So, a couple things. The joy around accounting and finance. That brings a huge smile to my face because I always joke one of the core values at Free to Grow CFO is passion. And whenever I talk about this with the team, I'm always like, guys, we're crushing this one because the the deep conversations that 5 to 6 people will have on like how to reconcile a Shopify merchant account and the arguments we'll get into to make sure it's done right is
I
just
love it.
about the most passionate, nerdy,
Yeah.
joyful accounting and finance conversation we could be having. And so, if you listen to the show at all, you know we're nerds about that around here. And so I'm looking forward to chatting because, as Melissa mentioned, Settle actually has its hands in a few different areas in the ecom and CPG world, but in particular, Settle has for quite some time now offered it's kind of like debt financing products, and we have several mutual clients with Melissa and the Settle team. And what we wanted to talk about today is just how to navigate debt options for a scaling
Yes.
ecom brand. There's unfortunately, to be quite honest with you, there's a lot of misinformation out there in the marketplace about
Yep.
the different debt options and whether they're good or bad or how much they cost, what lender protections or liabilities you have as the borrower. I actually think that out of all of the topics that we encounter as CFOs at Free to Grow, the navigating debt options is actually the one where we see the most misunderstanding, misconceptions, misinformation.
Interesting.
And we spend a lot of time educating brands on like what the different options really are, why they're different, what it means in terms of cost, what it means in terms of liability. And so today we're gonna break a bunch of this down.
Yes. Let's
There are
demystify.
Yeah, demystify with your financing fairy godmother, Melissa Cafagna. So, all right. So to get started, we're not going to get through it all, unfortunately. We might have to have you back. But
Happy to.
let's talk about just outline what some of the different debt structures are that are out there, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and just riff just the ones that come to mind? What are some of the
Sure.
different options? I'll add any that you don't put on the list, and then we'll start talking about them further.
Amazing. Obviously, like one of the first ones that come to mind are MCAs, just because I speak to a lot of emerging brand founders who maybe it's like their first or second time looking for capital, debt capital specifically. And so a lot of times, like these MCAs are pouring a ton of money into marketing and advertising. So oftentimes it'll be like maybe like or it's just the ease of it, right? Like for a
Yeah.
Shopify Capital, for example. And so definitely, I feel like for a lot of folks, like that's gonna be one of their number one options, just because they're getting targeted. Whereas a
We
lot
see
of
that constantly.
totally,
I mean,
yes.
almost every brand that we encounter on the CFO side, when they are either using MCAs or recently used MCAs. And by the way,
Correct.
for those of you that don't know the terminology,
Yes.
merchant cash advances, right?
Correct.
And we'll get into this in more detail in a second, but like super common. Why? Because of Shopify Capital,
Yep.
Clearbank, or now rebranded as Clearco, and
Yes.
Wayflyer, which have those three have focused on ecom as part of a
Yep.
big part of their go to market. And one of the reasons, at least from in my opinion, one of the reasons they focus on ecom is because the transparency, because of the daily receipt of cash, right, from
Correct.
merchant accounts, hence merchant cash advances. They're actually just pulling forward future cash flows that you're
Exactly.
going to receive from the credit card processors, right? And they're lending you kind of like in bulk ahead of time, right? And so that's MCAs. What are some of the other common debt structures that you see
Yep.
D2C brands encountering out there?
Sure. Definitely like line of credits, uh, SBAs, loans as well, ABLs, asset-based loans, and I would say those are like primarily the ones that I personally see. I've seen some pretty wild debt stacks, we call them, where some folks have maybe like 5 or 6 different merchant cash advances that they're working with to stay afloat,
Yeah.
or a business that just has like one line of credit and that's it. So we like see so many different kinds of debt stacks, or maybe you have credit cards. Like there's a myriad of ways to kind of make this work for your business. And that's why you need to talk to guys like Jon and Jeff, because they're going to like advise you on the best way to figure out what that debt stack's going to be. Because it's like, do you want to buy inventory with a credit card? I see brands do it. Sometimes it makes sense. I remember talking to this one founder who's like very emerging still, but let's say she was like a 1 to 5 million in sales, but she was still buying inventory on credit cards and doing like no interest credit cards. And she was
Yeah.
getting really creative with it, which I love. But at a certain point, like, you need something a little bit more sophisticated once you get to certain levels for your business. So I think it really just depends. And I think it's great to have the advisement, because if not, I'm going to say this like 3 times, I feel like choosing the wrong debt partner could mean the like failure of your business. And
Yeah.
so I think like understanding who you're going to partner with, whether it's like a short-term thing or like a long-term thing, seek help, seek advisement.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, I think obviously we're going to unpack a lot here with this,
Yeah.
but let's say it this way. I think first off, I have a lot of empathy for brand founders, right?
Totally.
Scaling an ecom brand is just about the
No
hardest
joke.
thing you could choose to do in the business
Yeah,
world.
totally.
And it's capital intensive. Why is it capital intensive? What does that mean? That means it takes a lot of capital. And what is one of the primary reasons? Inventory. You have to carry
Absolutely.
inventory. Service businesses generally are not capital intensive because they don't
Yep.
carry inventory, right? And so because of that, you have 2 major sources. You started a capital intensive business, so you have generally two major sources. We'll say three major sources of capital. There's your vendors, that's accounts payable and trade payables. There's equity investors, right? And then there's debt lenders. There's debt providers. There's technically a fourth, which is profitability and retained earnings, right? But those are kind of your sources of capital.
Yep.
Why do most founders not want to just sell a bunch of equity? Because the cost of equity is expensive. It's expensive to you as the founder to sell part of your business,
Absolutely.
right? And retained earnings, you may have tight retained earnings in seasons of scaling because you're focusing on growth, so there may not be a ton there, right?
Yep.
And then when you're starting, especially when you're emerging and you're in the first several years of your brand, you probably don't have really incredible payment terms with your vendors, so your vendor payables are not like a significant enough capital source. So that leads us to what? Debt, right? And hence why we're having this discussion and why it's so pervasive with D2C brands to have to understand how to choose the right debt. So here's what we're gonna dive into. We've laid out common forms of debt: MCAs, lines of credit, ABLs, which are somewhat related, SBA loans, and I kind of added term loans, which can roll up under one of those categories.
Yeah.
But here's what you need to consider. You shouldn't pick a debt partner just because they say, hey, we'll offer you the money that you need. There needs to be tied to your strategy, and you need to understand why you're going to use that provider, and you need to consider things like, what are the underwriting requirements?
Yes.
What are the lender protections, and what are your liabilities as the borrower? What is the cost of capital? And then what is the capital flexibility and the capital amount? It's not just one of those things. It's all of these things that you have to take into account. So let's start with MCAs. From your perspective, what are some of the most common reasons why people take on MCAs? And when considering strategy, underwriting, lender protections, cost of capital, all those things, where do you see MCAs being good and or bad?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, I think founders, like going back to the empathy thing, they have so much on their plate. And the last thing they want to do is go through like a really lengthy underwriting process to get more money when they have a vendor that they're probably late on paying already, and they need to get that inventory into their 3PL. So they just need money fast. It needs to be easy. And so I get that. And so I think with the MCAs, it really is the easiest form of capital you could probably get. So I think that's where I have a lot of empathy for these founders, because it's like you have so many competing priorities, and you at the end of the day have to weigh, like, sometimes when we make the decisions that we do, it's just like, do I want to pay more for doing the thing that's easier? Sometimes, that makes sense, and so, but really, I think understanding how this debt is going to impact your bottom line, which enough people don't talk about, your cash flow ultimately as well, is really important. On that topic, what do you consider are like the scenarios in which you've seen like MCA debt work? Because we can't say that it doesn't. Like, we know that it's like very expensive, but can you like think of like a scenario where you've seen that successfully executed?
Yeah, what's funny is I used to just have this blanket opinion, which is like MCAs are always bad.
Yeah.
I will say 95% of the time, the way that I see them being used, they are bad, and there's a better source of capital.
Absolutely.
But I have become a believer in the 5% that I've seen where is a good idea, which is if it's truly a short-term need and it's truly like to bridge you from one place to another, right? And then the second thing is if you don't need the maturity or the payback to line up with your inventory levels. And so let me dig a little bit deeper to explain this a little bit more. The reason why, if you just need the capital for a few weeks or a few months and you don't really see the need coming up again anytime soon, it might be okay to go with the MCA, which, by the way, annual effective rate, 25 to 50% annualized effective rate. Like, that's actually how much these things cost. The cheapest I've ever seen it is 20. And that's because it took a long time to pay that back.
Correct.
But they're very expensive. But you might want to go that route because all you do is click a button and maybe answer a
Literally.
couple questions and you get the capital. So there's like no underwriting. It doesn't take
None.
much time. It's
Yep.
unsecured. There, it is, in my opinion, it's not fully unsecured because they do have rights to the percentage of revenue or
Correct.
collections that they take from you. So yeah, do they not? They're not filing a UCC 1, which is a blanket all asset lien on the business, but they do have rights to your cash inflow. So it's not totally unsecured, even though they
Totally.
call it
Yep.
unsecured. But if you only need it once, maybe twice, and you don't see this recurring need, it may just be easier because if you go look at SBA loans, lines of credit, ABLs, other term loans, not always, but oftentimes, the level of effort and your cost of getting that thing underwritten, providing all the documents and the analysis, and then even paying upfront fees for getting those loans closed.
Yep.
If you're not using it regularly, those fees and that effort of like getting the loan approved, that actually might make your annual effective rate against the capital you actually borrowed possibly really, really high, right? And so actually the MCA may be just a little more expensive, but just easier.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. I rarely see brands only need debt just once and then never need it again. And why
Yeah.
is that? It's because as you're growing, and almost every ecom brand is seasonal, right? So there's peaks and valleys to sales, which means there's peaks and valleys to inventory. That means your working capital expands and contracts, right? As the business, as your sales seasonally go higher and go lower. And as you're growing, to meet the next sales growth goal, you always have to buy more inventory than you did the last time. And so
Right.
because working capital is expanding and contracting based on seasonality, but then it also overall is expanding because you're growing and inventory is growing, unless you're getting more capital coverage from retained earnings, equity investors, or your vendors, you need more and more debt as you continue to scale to finance your inventory as you're growing. So rarely do I ever see this one-time need for MCAs actually play out, and that's why it's so
Right.
uncommon. But
Absolutely.
I will say this: they will try to convince you that you can. What do they call it? What do they call? They have this term. You can top up. They were meaning like you can take another draw once you've gotten down to a certain percentage, right,
Correct.
of like paid back of the MCA. But if you're just gonna let it, that's called a revolve. If you're gonna let it revolve like that, just get a line of credit that can
Right.
actually revolve. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it'd be way cheaper and way more flexible.
100%. And at that point, it is worth going to doing the due diligence that you need to do.
Totally.
And I think like with the seasonality that these businesses have, like use that slower season to apply for debt because that'll be the time where you can get yourself set up and you will no longer have to worry about this.
I'll make another comment on that as well. Is if you have, the right bookkeeping and CFO partner, like Free to Grow CFO, we can do a lot of the heavy diligence information for you. Like when we've
Right.
worked with Settle on the few mutual clients we have, the data that you guys need, we're the ones pulling it, right? And we're actually even the ones looking at it and before we send it to Settle and making sure does it make sense? Is there anything we need to explain to the lender
Yes.
that we know they're going to have a question about, right? And so it can get a lot easier. The underwriting is a lot easier when your bookkeeping is clean and on an
Totally.
accrual basis, so meaning you have a
Yes.
clean balance sheet. And when you have a fractional CFO who can help interpret it to it can help be the interpreter between the lender and the brand. Because oftentimes,
Yes.
well, actually, this is a great question for you, Melissa. I know this for a fact because I know I'm friends with a lot of, not just people at Settle, but other lenders. There can be this barrier between the lender and the founder where like the lender needs something and the founder without a CFO doesn't fully understand how to get the
Totally.
lender what they need. Do you
Yes.
see that, and what are some examples that you see?
That's a good question. I would say Settle is a bit of an outlier because we're like very education first. So we try to be. I'm like mini CFO for you as far as just explaining this, but a lot of lenders do not work this way because they
For
don't
sure.
have the business or financial acumen. And like for the folks that work at Settle, for example, they have been doing working capital for a long time, so they know what they're doing. But that's like a really good question. I would say that. From the stories that I've heard at other lenders, I would say it's more of like a transactional partnership where it's just like I need to do and say whatever I need to get you across the line to close on this capital, and less like partnership where I'm like, what questions can I answer to make sure you feel comfortable with this? How do we differ from the other partners that you're looking at?
For sure.
How are we better? How are we worse? Right? And being able to advise there. But I do think if you do not have a partnership oriented lender that you're talking to at like the beginning of that like sales cycle, let's say, you need to speak to somebody who can walk you through that process because, and again, shameless plug, Jeff and John at Free to Grow, because I was gonna say like, this is the reality, right? A lot of lenders just they're not always looking out for what's in the best interest for you and the business, right? And like they have quotas, they need to make sure business is good on their end. Makes sense, right? You always have competing priorities, but at the end of the day, like I have heard of like absolute horror stories where, for example, there are a lot of lenders that they don't even look at your balance sheet. That means they're making an underwriting decision based on half of your business. And guess
Yeah.
what? They may potentially over leverage you with debt. And that means that they don't necessarily care about what is in the long-term interest of your business. Now, they may be a good short-term thing, but over leveraging you, there are times where unfortunately for us, like as a lender, we have to say no because the business simply has too much debt and we do not, though we could give them debt because of a myriad of other reasons, like growth is great. We have to say, sorry, we can't help you. You're over leveraged right now, but let's speak in 6 months. But
For sure.
consolidate that, like handle that, like figure out what you have to do because we do want to work with you. I don't know if that answered your question,
No,
but
no, I mean, no, there's some great, I mean,
Yeah.
I will take it a step further and say
Yeah.
that like debt is, I think that you can hear, you can hear like voices, competing voices out in the marketplace about
Totally.
like debt is good or debt
Right.
is bad.
Yeah.
Right. Leverage is good. It enhances return on equity.
Right.
Debt is bad because it's risky. Dave Ramsey, debt is evil, right?
Right.
Which I'm a huge Dave Ramsey fan personally, by the way. But like the
Yeah.
point I'm making is that I actually believe that debt is neither good nor bad. It's a tool, right?
Exactly.
And it's a
Yeah.
tool to be utilized in the right way and responsibly, just like any other business tool.
Totally.
And just like with any other tool in business, you can use it in the wrong way and in a way that actually creates more
100%.
risk than reward. And so part of that, like Melissa was just referring to, is that you do need to be mindful of how much debt you take on, because I believe that to some degree, if you're going to grow your e-com brand quickly, even if it's profitable, you just are going to need some amount of inventory financing. And
Totally.
it's because very few, and I'm talking about like 1 out of 100 brands that I encounter have a good enough what's called cash conversion cycle, which without getting into like all the details, basically it means how, for an e-com brand, how many days of your inventory are being financed by your vendors.
Correct.
Basically, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time, very few days of inventory are being financed by your vendors. And 1 out of 100 e-com brands I talk to has really aggressive payment terms, and it finances a lot of their inventory. And so
Yeah.
the amount of debt they need to finance their inventory is
Correct.
actually very little. That's very uncommon. And so
Very, yeah.
so just be aware of the fact that you do need to be mindful of how much debt you take on, and not all debt's made equal, and too much can be too risky.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk about lines of credit next
Yeah.
here.
Okay.
And I want to talk about lines of credit and ABLs, because
Yes.
there are asset-based lines of credit, and then there are lines of credit that have nothing to do with ABLs. So let me kind of define this, and then we'll dive in to where we see these used well and not so well, advantages and drawbacks.
Let's do it.
A line of credit, just like it sounds like, it's something that you can draw up and pay down lot of times kind of at will, right? Within certain limits. Some limits are what's called asset based, and that's where ABLs come from, where they will only let you borrow a certain percentage of your accounts receivable and or your inventory value at any point in time. So ABLs are kind of like a form of line of credit where they're tying the maximum amount you can borrow to
Correct.
some asset based, hence asset based lines or loans as the name. Where just what comes to mind for you of what you see as like advantages, drawbacks, where they're used well, not used well?
Yeah, great question. I mean, definitely the biggest advantage I would say is cost. And generally, a lot of brands will graduate from using something like Settle, or maybe a basic line of credit to an ABL, so that they can access more. Because sometimes, like basic, like lines of credit, let's just call them that,
Yeah.
those don't they aren't great at actually giving businesses like proper sizing, right? Like it's usually
yeah.
something very small. And so they generally have to graduate into that. So definitely cost. But on the cost, the caveat is to make sure you actually understand your true cost of capital, because ABLs will tell you like, this rate, but then there's like a facility fee and, auditing fees
Underwriting
and,
fee,
and
yeah.
and so
And
it's
maintenance,
like,
yeah.
and then like calculating your true APR based off of that, because oftentimes you'll find, well, I could just go with this other provider who maybe requires a little less due diligence on an ongoing basis, because ABLs do require a lot of due diligence, and you have to make sure your books are constantly clean, and then they're going to the cons. There sometimes could like present to be an issue based on that valuation that you said, where it's like, hey, I'm getting an amount of financing based on how much inventory I had, but shit, like what do I do when I just like sold through all my inventory because Black Fridays was bananas. And so being able to adjust from that perspective. So I think that's where it can be limiting. And so a lot of times what I'll see is at that point, founders will then kind of have to take on like a second form of debt to kind of fill in that gap until they build up their inventory. And so that's what I see. Yeah.
No, I was saying, so I have a lot of experience with ABLs because of being in the CPG and e-com world for so long. This is probably a whole episode. So I'm going to try to be brief and be fair to the different ABL lenders out there, because I am friends with a lot of them. And by the way, I want to be clear. Yes. All of these debt types serve a purpose.
Absolutely.
For the right business, the right strategy, the right season, right? And again, coming back, debt
right stage.
Or even these, all of these different debt products, they are not good. They're not bad.
Right.
They're tools, but understand these different components of them that we're walking through so that you can use them for the right reason at the right time. That's the whole point of this conversation, okay? And so ABLs, lines of credit. Let's talk from my perspective where I see this work well, what some of the pros and cons are. One that you brought up, in-transit inventory. On ABLs, generally speaking, inventory that is not in a warehouse domestically in the United States is ineligible. And so if you have an advance rate, let's say it's 60%, meaning that you can borrow up to 60% of the cost of inventory, you cannot finance 60% of what's on the water, or a prepayment you need to make to the vendor. So what like Melissa was just referring to this, you can get caught in this chicken or the egg game where you have not enough inventory. You're actually very profitable. You're crushing your sales goals. You're growing super fast. I've had several brands where I've had this issue. They're killing it, but they don't have enough cash to buy the next big container or containers they need to buy, and they need to make payment for those while they're in transit. The ABL will not finance that in-transit inventory unless you convince them to give you what's called an over advance. Over advances used to be really common before COVID. They're much less common today. Now, you can ask. I always say, like, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I always ask as a CFO, right?
Absolutely.
And they're not impossible, but they're becoming less and less prevalent. And it's why lenders don't want to lend against something that's in China, right? That they can't seize, or that's on a boat, that they can't seize, or that's on a
Yeah.
truck that they can't seize. If it's in a warehouse, then they have a lien on the goods that are at that warehouse. They can go seize them if you don't pay the loan, right? So in transit inventory is a big, huge problem for scaling D2C brands, and is usually the most common reason why I see an ABL get removed from the running for growing ecom brands. Where I tend to see it start to work is when they've reached a size and scale and enough profitability in the business, enough retained earnings in the
Yeah.
business, that there's this capital base that they have, that if they momentarily need in-transit financing, they can use that capital base for the in-transit piece, or they've developed enough relationship with their vendors that they've figured out how to get 30-day payment terms, and that 30 days that floats the in-transit, right?
Yep.
But if you're an emerging brand, which is most of the brands that we work with, and surprised, like, another misconception I guess I'll throw out there is I think a lot of brands think like, oh, by the time I hit 10 million, maybe 20 million, I'm good. I have a brand that's doing 50 million a year in revenue, and they still have this problem. So it
Yeah.
depends on multiple factors. The other thing I want to mention, you mentioned the sizing. This is where the distinction in my mind of bank versus non-bank comes into play. If you're using a bank, so you're using a Chase, a Wells
Yeah.
Fargo, a Bank of America, the advance rate on inventory is like usually 50%. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, yes, can you ask for more? Can you try to negotiate more? Yes, but they're usually not going to start there. They're very rigid. Non-bank, you can get up to like 75, maybe 80%.
Yeah.
The standard is probably starting at 55, and you can push them to get to 60, 65. And if you're elite, you can maybe get them in the 70s or the 80s,
Yeah.
right? But that money is more expensive
Yeah.
than bank, but a non-bank ABL lender will lend you more. They'll give you a bigger line.
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends at Chase and Wells Fargo and Bank of America, but they know because I've told them, and they know the emerging brands we work with, a lot of them are not in that box where they'll offer a $30 million
Mm-hmm.
brand $1 million line of credit for inventory. A non-bank ABL lender may offer that same brand $3 million,
Which is a
right?
big difference.
And
Yeah.
like a 75% advance rate instead of a 50% advance rate. So those are just a couple things to consider.
Yeah.
I can tell that you've got the
No,
fairy godmother
I
has
like,
some
I
comments.
know, I kind of want you to dig into like what that underwriting process is like, so
Mm,
that, founders are
yeah,
aware, like, how much time is this going to take? What am I expected to do on a regular basis to make sure I'm
totally.
in good standing with my ABL? Things like that.
Yes. So ABLs are probably out of all the loans that are on our list, those are the ones that have the heaviest underwriting and require the most. Maybe they're fairly similar to like SBA loans on the front end of underwriting, but where they differ is um the ongoing underwriting and compliance is, I think, far more substantial with an ABL than other types of loans that have heavy underwriting on the front end. And here's why. Again, because it's asset based, meaning that every time the lender's max allowable limit on the line or balance on the line is directly tied to the snapshot valuation of an asset on the day that you take the draw. And then they also test it periodically. Usually they test it monthly. It's not uncommon to see them test it weekly though. And then they'll test it more heavily quarterly or a couple times a year. So what does that mean? When they're testing it weekly, um, that means that you have to put together what's called a borrowing base report. So
Hmm.
let's just say that's tied to inventory valuation, because for an ecom brand that doesn't have AR or has very little AR, inventory is usually the asset base. That
Right.
means you have to prepare a report of exactly what you have on hand and the landed cost value.
Yes.
Now, I see Melissa cracking a little smile because the word landed cost
Yeah.
value, that's like a whole nother podcast episode,
Yeah,
and that's something
seriously.
but like, so if the without getting into all the details, tracking your landed cost and what's on hand today every week is a lot of work. Most
Yeah.
brands don't do it,
Yeah.
and if you try to do it, it's usually wrong. um
Mhm.
and it's not the brand's fault. It's just a lot of
Yeah.
work and it's
Yeah.
hard, right? And so you have to prepare this borrowing base, and whoever, usually the CEO founder, you have to sign it, and you're signing it certifying, saying, I'm certifying this is accurate because the bank is giving you a percentage of that value, of that asset value available to draw. So you have to do that
Yeah.
every week or every time you do a draw, or at least monthly. And then usually quarterly, or at least a couple times a year, they do what's called an inventory appraisal, where they actually request all of this. They basically re-underwrite the loan, more or less. It's
Yeah.
a mini version of the underwriting you went through at
What
the
you just
beginning.
went through. Yeah.
And it's because they're double checking that the economics are the same in the business, that your
Yes.
margins are the same. They'll even oftentimes send someone physically to your warehouse to do a
Mm-hmm.
physical count
Oh
to
yeah.
test, to make sure that you're borrowing against an asset that exists physically in reality and it's not some fake made up thing. Um, and the reason this is all required is because everything's tied to the asset
The
base. So they
security.
have to
Yeah.
have, they have no other data feed to confirm that the asset base that they're using to borrow or to lend against is actually real. And so when is this worth it? This is worth it when the advance rate is right, the partner is right, it matches your cash conversion cycle the right
Mhm.
way, and the ebbs and the flows of your working capital. If there's a good match there, right, um, then it can be worth the effort. And if it's a
Totally.
lender who is truly helpful, that can quickly expand line sizes and is willing to give you over advances when you need them situationally. We had a great partner like this at Guardian Bikes, and then at some point it stopped working because
Yeah.
they couldn't do in transit, and in transit was our need
Yeah.
for that season, right? And
Yep.
so what's the point of making all this? The level of effort put in, choose the line first and foremost, that the actual capital availability moves in concert with your working capital needs.
Yeah.
Don't use one that doesn't match and that fights against your working capital
Yeah.
needs. Then and only
Definitely.
then decide if you want to put in the work to get that loan and maintain that loan.
Absolutely. And I would also say like looking into kind of vertical specific ABLs is super important because 9 times out of 10, they will be more understanding of what like a CPG ABL cares more about like cold chain logistics on your supply chain and if you're managing that better, right?
Totally.
Versus somebody who, maybe not sure who you guys were with at Guardian, but who that is not an issue. So like really finding
Yeah.
somebody who understands what your specific supply chain for your specific, I would say like e-com or market vertical is super big. And that's why Settle is so big on helping CPG and e-com because we know it well. We understand the problems that those founders are going through, and we really believe we have a solution that actually helps with that. So I would say that in every kind of lending product that you think about, at this point, right, in the era of fintech, there is likely a vertical type that will help you much better. And so
Totally.
that's definitely something to consider when you are shopping around. But yeah, oh my gosh. Jon, as you can see, is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to different financing products. I was also learning things here when it comes to ABLs. A lot of the things that you said I was aware of, but other things that I was not aware of just because Settle is not an ABL. But we work and do like a lot of trainings into understanding how they work. And so absolutely spot on and definitely a lot of due diligence. And I think, yeah, it's just really the saying comes to mind is the juice worth the squeeze
Totally.
when it comes to this financing product and when are you at that level of sophistication where you're
To be
kind of
able to
comfortable.
manage it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and
So-
that's another
yeah.
reason, like, actually, I think the vertical specific thing you mentioned is, like, don't underestimate the importance of that. That's
Yeah.
actually why Free to Grow, we're vertical
Exactly.
specific. We
Yes.
are bookkeeping and fractional CFO for growing ecom brands. And it's because we can provide so much more value by understanding your business model and your scaling challenges at a deep, deep level than
Totally.
someone who's horizontal trying to
Yes.
learn those lessons with you, right? And
Absolutely.
and the lending partner
I
thing
know.
from a vertical
Yeah.
perspective is just as important.
I know. Sometimes I'll go to like these, I love all of our accounting partners, but sometimes I'll go to their pages and the amount of verticals that they serve, where it's like 10 to 15 different verticals. And I'm like, sure, you can have a different accountant that has like a specialty, MCPA that has a specialty into that specific vertical, but make sure if you are going that route that they have somebody who knows their stuff,
For
and
sure.
has like that background and can advise in that. But if not, I always recommend doing the vertical specific thing, for sure. And based on kind of the earlier conversation that like we're talking about, talk to me about like the importance of actually using a fractional CFO versus your accounting firm when it comes to making decisions like this. Because I have seen, accounting firms advise on capital, but sometimes, it's like, is that really
Yeah.
the best thing? Where I've even seen certain accounting firms, refer to settle, but we're probably not the best solution for them based on certain things that I see. So talk me through like how, I guess, what's your edge in that space? Because you talked a lot about a lot of things that I think maybe if you are a CPA, and hey, I used to be an accountant, so no shame or shade here.
Hey, so did I. So I was an
Exactly.
accountant first too.
Yeah. So, which I think most folks are, right? And so kind of talk me through the advantages of going with somebody who actually has that CFO background, like fractional CFO, and that is what they've been focusing on versus kind of just saying, oh, yeah, we provide fractional CFO services, but that's not
For
really
sure.
like their specialty.
Yeah, it's funny because I had a post a couple weeks ago about the difference between an accountant and CFO, and I believe you were the first comment.
I'm
You said,
probably
"Ooh,
inspired by
you said
that,
this,
yeah.
this was spicy,
Spicy,
Jon."
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in its simplest form, accountants are focused on the past,
Yeah.
and CFOs are focused on the future.
Yes.
Now, unpacking that, there's a lot underneath those two bullet points, but accountants are specialists at recording what has happened in a way that it can be interpreted by various parties, right, to make different decisions about the future. So accountants are 100% needed from a
Yes.
bookkeeping standpoint. And
Totally.
I'll even say in terms of tax accountants, they're needed as well because tax compliance and tax savings is a huge, important thing for a growing
100%.
profitable brand. But it's not the same thing as a CFO, right? A CFO may have come from an accounting background, but a CFO also may have come from an FP&A or an investment banking or a private equity background. They don't
Right.
have to have come from an accounting background. Now, they need to know how to use financial statements, which are prepared by accountants, right,
Yes.
to make forward-looking decisions, but they don't have to actually be the preparers of said financial statements, right? And so a CFO, there are a lot of people out there, hence the post that I made a couple weeks ago, and I talk about this a lot in my content. If your CFO is really just a glorified accountant, they're not a CFO. It doesn't mean they're useless. You still
Yes.
need the accounting,
Yes.
but a CFO is a strategist who helps you build the vision you have in your head as a founder of the future you're trying to build. A CFO helps enable that, right? They use, amongst other things, they use the data that accountants record to help make those decisions, but they understand things like forecasting, scaling in an ecom from the ecom vertical perspective. They understand how to scale ad spend profitably. They
Yes.
understand
So
how to
important.
build teams profitably. They understand how to manage inventory, and they understand, again, amongst other things, how they understand capital structure. They understand how to think about retained earnings versus equity, outside equity capital versus debt capital, and how to stack those things, going back
Yeah.
to capital stack, to stack your capital in the most optimal way such that it meets your needs so that you have the capital you need to invest and achieve your growth goals, but at the same time balancing that against risk and liability to lenders and cost of capital. And so it's not optimizing for either one of those. I'm not optimizing just for capital availability or just for cost of capital or just for liability. I'm looking at all three of those things and I'm saying, how can I, as the CFO, help the founder achieve their goals while keeping all of these three in balance, right? And so CFOs are enablers of achieving your goals, and we know how to take tools, debt being one of those tools, and how to advise the brand founder on how to use those tools to get from where they are today to where they want to go.
Ooh, I love that. Look at that. I just want to start a business just so I could work with you guys. Um,
Oh man, so really quick because I want everyone to get a chance to hear about Settle's capital
yeah.
solution. But what I'll do just in the interest of time is I'll
Yeah.
give everyone a quick high flyover of SBA loans and term loans, and then we're going to go to
Yes.
Settle Capital. So
Let's do it.
SBA loans, I have a lot of experience with this because of being in the emerging brand world.
Yep.
SBA loans, there's a lot of allure around them because they are lowest cost of capital because they're subsidized by the government.
Yes.
And it's like, man, I can get that much money for that little amount, but it's a trap if you're really trying to scale. And the reason
Yeah.
is heavy underwriting, lots of restrictions around your
Yes.
cap table and other things that you could potentially trip, tons of liability, and you can't really remove any of that liability. You're gonna have a PG. It's guaranteed. You actually can't negotiate that out. A lot of stuff you can't negotiate because the government won't back it if you negotiate those things. So
Right.
if you're willing to put up basically your personal net worth,
Yeah.
it could be a great way to get a cheap source of capital. But if you're growing fast and you think you need to refi that SBA loan soon, it's probably not worth all the fees and all the underwriting because you're going to end up replacing that capital source with a more expensive one. You can refi an SBA loan with an SBA loan, but again, it comes with all those same restrictions and all those same liabilities. And so I see SBA loans better for businesses that are stable and not
Yes.
growing super fast, where you can actually
Yes.
keep that source of capital for a long period of time. They do have ABLs, but usually it's a term loan, meaning you're paying it back over an amortized period,
Right.
usually 5, 7, or 10 years. And so unless that meets your needs and you're not growing super fast and you don't think you have to refi it soon, SBA loans tend to not be the greatest solution. I learned this the hard way. We got a couple SBA loans at Guardian Bikes, and we had to refi out of both of them because we were growing so fast and they no longer met our needs. And where did we go after that? Non-bank ABL. And so that's a little bit about SBA loans, but Settle Capital. We talked about MCAs, lines of credits, ABLs, SBA loans, and term loans. Where is Settle different, and how do you see the way that you structure your capital solutions as really providing an edge to brands and like actually meeting their needs?
Yeah, good question. Oftentimes it requires a lot of education. I speak to a lot of CFOs, fractional CFOs, accountants, and founders, and it's kind of hard to wrap your head around Settle because I do think it's kind of unique in the way that it works. And the reason being is because I think it's a super valuable resource to brands where they're like, I don't know, this sounds too good to be true. It's really this simple. And I'm like, yeah. One on the underwriting end, as far as it just not being like the super time consuming, lots of due diligence that we do, but we do enough to make sure we're going to provide you with a capital solution that is healthy for your business. So that's really important. I would say that when talking to founders about this, mostly, I really like to kind of position us as far as like where you are with your business, where, you know, maybe you don't want to use MCAs anymore, right? And you're like, I can't do that anymore. It's sucking up my cash flow. You know, I'm tired of, you know, giving a percentage of sales. But maybe you're not sophisticated or large enough yet for an ABL or a large line of credit. You don't have the sales yet for that, because a lot of ABLs do have like minimum revenue requirements. So that's kind of where I think Settle fits perfectly. And when it comes to cost too, we're nudged right there with much lower APRs compared to MCA, and only a little bit higher compared to ABLs and lines of credit. And what we honestly do is really provide a solution to founders, to CFOs, who are just looking for a simple, meaningful solution to pay for inventory that makes sense for their business. And so essentially you can kind of think of us, our founder Alec came from the company Affirm. You can kind of think of it as like a B2B buy now, pay later for your inventory and ad spend. The fact that we even include ad spend shows you how like focused we are in helping e-com brands who
For
are
sure.
very focused on that as well. And the way we work is we finance your invoices to your vendors and then you pay us back later. What that allows us to do is provide you with better rates, because some of our competitors, what they're doing is just advancing you money and charging you a premium for that. But we're taking a little bit more of a different approach when it comes to our risk. But what that does is allows us to provide a value so that we can actually provide a cost for you that makes sense for your business and won't, I would say, like, compromise your margins too much compared to an MCA. And at the beginning of your business, that's super important to weigh that out when you're thinking about a debt solution, right? How does this actually impact my margins, my retained earnings, like Jon was talking about? So I would say if you are a business that is over MCAs, you don't want to deal with somebody taking a percentage of your sales. You don't want to deal with a daily, weekly kind of payback. But you don't quite qualify for those larger kind of solutions like ABLs or larger lines of credit. Settle is the perfect solution for you. So I'm always happy to talk to somebody, even if Settle is not the right solution at the moment. Like, I talk to founders all day about just debt in general, hence financing Fairy Godmother. I will have a conversation with you. Anybody on my team will have a conversation with you on how we can help. But last thing I wanted to say is we also rolled out our inventory management solution. That also we're really looking to solve, because we understand the relationship between capital and inventory so much and how important that is to your business. But now we want to provide an additional tool to helping founders really get a good understanding of their inventory, how that's connected to AP, which we've talked about on different occasions. And we're really just looking to be a very like CPG e-com focused light ERP that really is solving real problems for founders. And so yeah, if that's something that you need to understand your landed COGS, you need a one source of truth solution for your inventory, we're happy to also have that conversation as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely recommend just checking it out, because Settle can run your AP workflow, right?
Yes.
And then just like you can just use it standalone for AP management as a solution, as an alternative to Bill.com,
Yes.
right? But inside that, there is an IMS capabilities where you can actually purchase and track inventory at landed costs. And then if you need financing for purchasing inventory, you can do that all native in the platform as well. So you can manage your AP, your inventory, and finance it all in the same place. So I highly recommend checking it out.
Thank you, Jon. That was beautiful. More to come too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
We're building more.
I mean, we're gonna probably have to have another conversation on the show with you, because we only got through. We didn't get through it all, but we got through a lot of really meaty stuff. And so before we land the plane, though, I always like to ask a personal question. So in addition to being a fairy godmother on the side, what's a little known fact about Melissa that you think people might find shocking or surprising?
Yeah, I honestly, it's my go-to, and it's so easy. Anytime like I start a new company or I'm like meeting a new group of people, this always shocks folks, but I'm actually a triplet. And so it
that's awesome.
It kind of comes with like a myriad of silly questions, like, can you read each other's minds and things like that. But it's quite like the conversation booster, because I get a lot of questions. I don't usually lead with it. Like, we just did our
you usually lead with it.
I don't, even though I just brought it up right now, but like a lot of people, like we just did our Settle offsite in Cedar Lakes. If you need somewhere to do a retreat, please go there. It was phenomenal. But a lot of people had no idea, and they found out like after they've known me for like a year, like, or a year and a half or however long it's been. They're like, wait, what? And I'm like, but yeah, it's pretty wild. And people are like, what's that like? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, what's it like being a single child or somebody with just like a sibling that's 1 year younger? It's not that different, I guess. Sure. But it's pretty wild.
The question is really for your parents. What was that like? Not for you, right? Like,
totally. Wild. Lots of love, but so much fun. And yeah, it was. My sisters are my best friends, so we call each other womb mates. And so it's definitely a fun fact for sure. What about for you, Jon? Does anybody ask you like what's like a fun fact
funny.
for you?
I love having guests who actually like turn the tables on me.
Yes.
I mean, some people know about this because I recently like I guess announced this or like made it a part of my content, but 12 years ago, I was in a touring thrash metal band called Fate's
I
Demise, and
love that.
I still write heavy metal music to this day. I'm actually working on a record, short one, 4 songs. I'm almost
That is
done writing
so
it, and
cool.
my goal is to launch it or to release it sometime in 2025. But
Amazing.
so when I'm not chasing around my 3 little kids and growing free to grow and helping ecom founders
Ooh,
scale,
full
I
plate.
am writing heavy metal music,
I love
and
that. I
I
you
thoroughly enjoy it.
you know why I love that? Because I feel like sometimes like folks in like finance or accounting kind of get this bad rep that like you're like right brain and da 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 da. But it's like everybody has a creative outlet likely.
Totally
They just sometimes don't know it. Like sometimes it's as obvious as I am a musician, right? But like everybody has like the ability to be a creative and a logical person like
agreed.
in their trade maybe, but then they have like this amazing creative outlet. So I love that. I hopefully, you know, maybe if, when the kids get a little older, you can start maybe touring for that.
I have this dream that I'll somehow get a band together, and we don't need to go on some really long tour, but
Yeah,
even just like a
something.
week or something. I love
That
playing
sounds
music on
amazing.
stage live,
Yeah.
and so one
I
of
mean,
these
yeah, that's
days
the
I
best.
will get a
Yeah.
chance to do it and might let my kids watch.
That sounds
Um,
amazing. Awesome.
well, Melissa, this conversation was jam packed full of
Love good stuff.
really practical information about a topic, debt financing, that is front and center for every brand that I encounter. So I appreciate you coming on and dropping knowledge on some of these areas that, quite frankly, I don't think there's enough education in the marketplace about. So I appreciate your
Yeah.
willingness to do that. Before we, completely land the plane, though, where can people find out more information about you and about Settle?
Yeah, you guys can find me on LinkedIn. Melissa Cafagna is my name on LinkedIn. And we'll make sure to link that so you guys can give me a follow. I love talking about CPG brands. I post about CPG brands all the time. Founders within the CPG world specifically, they're so inspirational to me. And Settle. www.settle.com. Do not settle for a lame capital solution. Just kidding. All capital solutions are great. Yeah, yeah, they are. They are. Okay, but Settle is the best. We're the best. I'm sorry. No, but yes, www.settle.com. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. You can slide in my DMs. I'm happy to just direct you in the right path, whatever you're interested in.
Definitely
Yeah.
reach out to Melissa if you have any questions about how Settle can help you guys with either AP, inventory management, and/or inventory financing. And don't forget, if you want more helpful tips on scaling a profit-focused D2C brand, consider following me, Jon Blair, on LinkedIn. You'll see Melissa probably in some of the comments
You
there.
will.
And if you're interested in learning more about how Free to Grow's D2C accountants and fractional CFOs can help your brand increase profit and cash flow as you scale, check us out at freetogrowcfo.com. And until next time, scale on. Thanks,
Bye.
Melissa.
Thanks for having me, John.